Hello, this is Karan from San Francisco.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles. And welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. We hope you find these movies and topics fun and revelatory to you, just like they've been to us. And Fran, why don't you tell the listeners what we're talking about today?
All right, so today we are talking about the city that I live in, San Francisco. So it's the movies that shaped our views of San Francisco episode. So
Nice.
I've been here for, I want to say now 10 years, sort of on and off. And in many ways, I consider San Francisco home now, even though I didn't grow up here. So very excited to kind of talk about the city and talk about all the movies that connect us to the city. But I guess from a framework standpoint, like as always, this has really been about, for me, thinking, what does this city mean to me? How has it impacted my life in different ways, and how I've wrestled with that, but also how this city has brought me so much joy and all the different developments of my life. And that's really what this episode is about, at least for me, through the lens of movies, obviously. But in general, like I said, this place is home. This is where I have my community. This is also the place that, I've wrestled with the most, partly because of the time I've been here in my life, which is kind of, post grad school, kind of early adult years, I should say. But then also a city that constantly continues to go through a ton of change, which I guess is true for most cities, but it sort of feels to me that San Francisco is one of those places which probably is on that evolution clip at a much faster rate than a lot of other cities, at least that I've been associated with. So I think that will show up as a big theme in the movies that I've picked. But how about you, Alex? What's your relationship with San Francisco been?
Yeah, one question actually I have for you before I jump into my relationship. You mentioned you feel SF is home. I know you moved around a lot as a child in India. Is San Francisco the city you've lived in the longest in terms of years in your life, or is there a place where you spent more time? Just actually curious.
Yeah, it's funny. If you're talking about number of years spent in a continuous way, LA would be that place where I spend the most number of years in a continuously. But in aggregate, probably San Francisco now is the place where I spend the most number of years.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's just always interesting because I think about that a lot too, of the place I've spent the most aggregate years in.
Yeah.
For me, it's Los Angeles, and for you, it's San Francisco. I think that's pretty cool, and then really fun then to hear your thoughts through the films we're going to talk about today. But in terms of my relationship to the city, I grew up on the East Coast, so I was always aware of San Francisco. Had definitely a big idea in my mind of what the city was, especially through the lens of the 60s and the Summer of Love, and what San Francisco meant culturally in the United States was definitely something that was through all movies and TV and music and everything. So I definitely had that idea in my mind. Visited for the first time growing up on a family vacation. Liked it. I thought it was really cool. And then actually lived there for 3 months, so briefly, in Lower Haight in city during a period of time when I worked at an internship in Emeryville. So I lived in the city for 3 months and then commuted across the bay to go to Emeryville. So that was an experience there of actually living in the city and seeing what it was like. Definitely the differences from what I had in my head, from what was on screen, very different than what I expected, in good and bad ways. And then have visited there, visited you before there a couple times, and just been there as a tourist, been there for work. So I've definitely been to San Francisco a lot of times, and have a lot of views of it. I definitely echo what you said in terms of a city of change. I find it more around the city that is kind of a paradox to me in terms of how to figure, because not only is it changing, it seems to be a lot of contradicting itself in different phases as it's evolving. It doesn't seem to me like a clear trajectory of how it's growing or what it kind of becomes. Like some other cities, New York has changed a lot, but in a very extreme direction in one direction. I think San Francisco still kind of goes back and forth a lot of things. So it was fun coming up with this list, I think. And really, again, as someone who spent a lot more time than me, I'm really curious about your thoughts and how your films have shaped your views.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, do you want to tell us what your movie number 3 is?
Sure. Yeah, I'll kick it off. My number 3 movie for movies that shaped my view of San Francisco is the 2008 film Milk. This is directed by Gus Van Sant, starring Sean Penn, Josh Brolin, Emile Hirsch. The plot summary: the story of Harvey Milk and his struggles as an American gay activist who fought for gay rights and became California's first openly gay elected official. So this film, to me, and why I put it on the list is, San Francisco, like I mentioned earlier, has always been a view in my mind of a city that is about, activism and social progress and change. And I think this, again, came a lot through what the city was known for in the 60s as a place of the hippie movement and people really trying to progress for different types of rights. And this film, to me, really represents that. And in Harvey Milk's story, so, Milk actually, as they talk about in the film, he grew up on the East Coast and came to San Francisco specifically because he was escaping a lot of the discrimination as a gay man that he faced. There's a montage in the opening credits of all the issues around the country of, people oppressing gay citizens and not, and violently attacking them. And this was the environment that Milk, I think, was growing up in on the East Coast. And he saw San Francisco as a place, even, I think, said in the film, like a place where you kind of drop out and find love and can sort of be yourself. And that's why he went there. And I definitely feel this city still represents that. I mean, whether it lives up to that or not is a question, but it definitely represents that, I think, culturally as a place that is, you can be yourself. And Milk definitely demonstrates that, right? He's very brash, self-assured, outspoken. He doesn't hide who he is when he's in San Francisco. He, gets his business, and when he first is greeted by someone in the neighborhood, they're like, "Oh, you're a gay man. Like, we're not going to welcome you here." But he doesn't shy away from that. He's like, "No, I'm going to actually then organize businesses of people that don't mind what your sexuality is." So he really fights for his own rights as a gay man. And I think that, again, represents the activism spirit that I definitely get from San Francisco. But at the same time, the movie, and just like Milk's life, does end tragically. He does get assassinated. And it's not there's a lot of complications that I think even today they don't really know motives in terms of the assassination. But I think, again, this sort of represents that while San Francisco is a place where activists like Milk would pushing for change, there is still that reactionary force against it where you still are up against obstacles. And obviously, again, he unfortunately was assassinated. So the thing I think, though, that this movie does well also is at the very end, it does show that his activism and even in his death was shown as a spark that sort of pushed the gay rights movement even further elsewhere in the country. So it's like San Francisco is looked upon as not only a place where the activists go, but they can be themselves. They can take a political stand. They can have successful victories. He was actually elected into San Francisco city government, and then did a very good job of pushing his agenda within that government against many different forces, including other more establishment gay men who didn't want to rock the boat in this way, but he really wanted to fight for his convictions. And all this fighting, even though he was not successful because he unfortunately was assassinated, that in the long run, he sparked a movement. And at the end of that film, I think is very powerful and really shows that. And I do still view San Francisco as a city that can be the light that can spark a lot of, social change throughout the country in the United States. And just a fantastic film as well. I think performances across the board, just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, Sean Penn definitely deserved this Oscar win for this performance. Totally. Josh Brolin is also just amazing in its very troubled character as a rival, and then the person who ends up assassinating him. But it's not it's a very complex character, and his reasons for things I think are not super cut and dry. And really, Gus Van Sant, I just think, does an excellent job of not making this film, too. It's not really an issue movie, but it is. He uses the right parts of Harvey Milk's life, I think, to keep the story interesting, but not kind of beat you over the head with a message, but just make an incredibly inspiring film that I just really enjoy. And for me, I think the film represents that activism that I feel is within San Francisco.
Yeah, great pick. Agree with everything you said. I was so happy to revisit this. I've watched this movie a couple of times before, and every time, I think this might be one of the best quote unquote biopics, at least
Yeah.
that come to my mind, of recent years or maybe any length of time. And it's for the reasons that you talked about, that you're not only transported in this person's life, but I love that it's not a cradle to grave situation.
Yes.
I love that it's very much his story through what he stands for, through the
Mm-hmm.
movement.
Mm-hmm.
It's also an ensemble, which often biopics are not. Like, you really get a sense of all the other people who are in that little photo shop,
Yeah.
photo space shop, who are kind of running this whole thing. What are they up to? What do they really stand for? The people that he's in relationship with,
Mm-hmm.
James Franco's character, Jake
Yeah.
Luna's character, like, you
Uh-huh.
really see kind of a spectrum of also gay life depicted, without holding back anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's done in a way that feels very interesting. The pacing of the movie is great. Uh, yeah, you sort of feel transported. Like, I watched this movie, I think I was living here when this movie came out. So I remember, just being really moved and enraged and roused by the first time I watched this movie. It's one of the Oscar win speeches, not Sean Penn's, which I totally agree, very well deserved, but the screenwriter Justin
Oh.
Lance Black.
Oh man, yeah.
It's one of the moments where I don't think I've teared up that much on anyone winning an award. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just an award, but it really meant something for this movie to be made the way it was made, and then for it to be recognized, and for a young guy like Justin Lance Black to kind of stand up there and share his own story and the struggle that he'd had, and then to pour himself in the making of this movie. It's such a brilliant script. So yeah, it's one of those things that doesn't happen very often in storytelling, and I think it's like the perfect alchemy of all of it comes together, and the legacy lives on.
Mm-hmm.
And you also see the messiness. I guess the last thing I would say, you also see the messiness of activism in this
Yes.
movie. Like, it's
Yes.
not aggrandized that, oh, just because we are fighting for something that we believe is right, everything is all going to be neatly, moving in a linear fashion. It's very messy.
Yes.
There's steps, there's setbacks. There are people who don't have their heart in the right place. There are people who are still learning. There are people who are reluctant, who don't want to be a part of it. There are
Mm-hmm.
people who are really in it, but yet you can question their motives. There's all sorts of things that happen with movements. And this is very true even today, in San Francisco, where there's sort of it's almost like a joke in San Francisco that, oh yeah, you hear something on a Sunday morning and people are like, oh, it must be a protest. And then,
Oh.
they're off to brunch after that. So it's
Right,
almost like
right.
a joke
Yeah.
in the city. And you see that kind of the messiness of it all. So yeah, love this movie. So inspired by what Harvey Milk did, and was very happy to revisit it.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a lot of great points too about just the politics. Look at this movie through a political lens, because I do think it does cover the messiness and the fact that it's not you can be an idealist, but you do have to go into this, or not you have to. He chose to go into the system and use the system to his advantage. Is you do still have to wheel and deal. You do have to work with people that aren't aligned on every single ideology. As long as you're not compromising your specific ideology, there's other things you can compromise on and work with within the system to eventually, get some change. And sometimes those are hard decisions, but I think what this movie does, and Milk did, is never compromise on his main goal of making sure that that gay people had more rights or equal rights, but was able to work with other people and compromise on other things and just find out what is the path to get there. And that is my goal. And I will work hard to get it done, no matter what I have to do. And I have to do some, shady things or whatever, as long as the ends kind of justify the little bit of means of politics, because politics are going to be messy. So I think
and
that's
it's also very practical, though,
totally
right?
very practical.
His entire agenda is actually about small businesses doing well, people standing up for themselves. And it's almost like bad business to discriminate against anybody, because you're going to lose out on all those people, which is a baseline message that can resonate with everybody and anybody, which feels very genuine to me, as opposed to, a quote unquote agenda, because it's just so human. Like, we are all, especially in this country, you're in a capitalist country.
Exactly.
So It's
Right.
the right message, first of all. But then going back to the messiness, he's not all away from controversy either. Like his whole push for people to come out of the closet,
Oh, right. Exact.
it's
Very
yeah, it's
problematic.
very controversial, quite
Uh-huh.
problematic in many ways. But you also see why that mattered so much, because
Hmm.
what he was fighting for was that if everybody knows in their community, in their neighborhoods, the people that they interact with, somebody who is gay, it automatically humanizes this quote unquote issue,
Right.
as opposed to what is being touted, that these people are, perverse and they're going to ruin the
Hmm.
society. And so it was very important to counter that
Hmm.
with the reality and humanity of these people who are just like anybody else.
Right.
So, but at the same time, it's a pretty controversial stance. So
Yep. Yep.
yeah, it sort of made me want to get deeper into his life. I know there's a great Oscar-winning documentary that
Yes.
came out years
Yes.
ago, which I have not seen.
Life and Times of Harvey Milk. It's
Exactly.
definitely worth
So
seeing.
I
Yeah.
want to see that, and yeah, I don't know, made me feel proud of living in the city.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I think that is what I got away from the movie too. Of San Francisco is this spark that can light
Yeah.
change for good. Great. So why don't we move on to your number three?
Yeah. Speaking of spark that can light change, and that change can sometimes, be for the good and sometimes be not for the good. It's messy once again, right? So my number three is Last Black Man in San Francisco, movie from 2019, directed by Joe Talbot, starring Jimmy Fails and Jonathan Majors. Quick log line: a young man searches for home in the changing city that seems to have left him behind. So I put this movie on my list to sort of capture what we were just saying, even in Milk, and sort of in our general conversation about San Francisco, about the changing nature of San Francisco. And I think this movie really captures that. Obviously, the movie is about gentrification and what is happening to people who are less fortunate, usually minorities.
Mm-hmm.
But at the heart of it, I think this movie is really represent the dichotomy of wealth, innovation, and power, which this city represents, alongside homelessness and helplessness. These two things coexist in this place, which is heartbreaking, but also quite fascinating, actually. And as somebody, who's moved his whole life, growing up in India, different parts of the country there, but then also in this country, to me, this whole idea of what is home and how much do you fight for it really resonates, because that's what this is really about in this movie. It's about bigger ideas and
Right.
issues, of course, that are political, about power and homelessness and all of that. But at the heart of it, this movie is about home. And what do you consider as home? What will you do? What lens would you go to kind of preserve that and find that? And I think that thread really resonates with me. This movie is also about friendship. These two guys, I've not seen a relationship like that depicted on screen ever.
Mm-hmm.
The visuals of those two on a skateboard, just gliding through the streets of San Francisco, there's something about that image, and specifically two black men. I've never seen that in my life. The moment I saw that in the trailer, right when this dropped years ago, it sort of struck me right then and then. Watching this movie in the theater for the first time, it just moves me so much to see two guys who are straight, but are in this kind of friendship and relationship, and there's like actual true love and true longing between the two of them, which is just so beautiful. But bringing it back to San Francisco, I think this movie is also about this divide between art and commerce. Like sometimes in very literal ways, where Jonathan Major's character actually is a sketch artist. He's a playwright in his own way, and that is sort of butting against this house that they think is theirs, and they're squatting in there while they are dealing with the Richie Rich, they're dealing with the realtors and all of these people. So the whole like idea of art versus commerce, DIY versus big money, power, it's sort of butting heads against each other at all levels in this movie. It's gorgeously shot. It's like a great kind of, love letter to San Francisco. And that's the part that's so beautiful to me about this movie, is that this movie could be viewed in a very dark light, that all is bad.
Right.
But I think there's something about the way the movie is shot and in the sweetness of their relationship that you get like a pretty strong light of hope throughout this movie, even when dark things are happening, just because the way it's shot. And that really mirrors my own experience with San Francisco. Like, I've often gotten to a place in my head where I get so, I don't know, caught up with the changes that are happening that may not be for the good, and this feeling so helpless about homelessness, and sometimes even feeling disgusted about how much money there is all around us, while no one seems to know what to do with this problem. And I've left the city when I've come to a point where I just can't really deal with that feeling. But then there's something about the light of this city that always pulls me back, and I'm always happy to be back here. Maybe a little bit more evolved, hopefully, at least in my perspective of how I view this, because ultimately this is just, a changing ball of yarn that is going to be messy in terms of how it unfolds. Sometimes it feels like, the yarn is kind of coming together, but sometimes it feels like it's all over the place. And that's just how the city is. But hopefully through these changes, we are moving towards a place that feels like it is in the right direction. There are days when I don't feel that, but most days I do feel that, having lived in the city. I don't think this movie is a perfect movie. It's very much a first feature effort. And you see that, a movie that's beautifully shot, beautifully acted, but has like a million ideas. Not all of them are fully seen through. Sometimes sort of drags, and sometimes feels a little bit pretentious as well. But having said all that, I think this movie is still very powerful, and I'm very excited to see what this director does next, if he hasn't already. And then Jonathan Majors is sort of the breakout from this movie, who has done many, many great things since, who's just so tender and brilliant in this movie. Again, a character that I've not seen portrayed like this before. So yeah, that's my number 3, Last Black Man in San Francisco.
Yeah, this is a great pick. I'd never seen this film before. I heard of it. I think it actually premiered at Seattle Film Festival when we lived there. I remember taking the bus down to work and seeing the marquee for this movie at a theater. But I had never seen it, and I really I thought it was very powerful, and one of those films where you watch it, it touches on so many different things, and it doesn't really provide answers. It's just sort of asking questions and interesting questions, where I was thinking about this movie for days after I saw it. And just about all the different things that it raises. But like, for me, there's 2 things that it really is. The main themes that I kind of got from it are really about like, what is home, like you said. And I think what this movie sort of portrays is the main character is thinking the home is something physical. It's an actual house. It's a physical place. But really, I think the movie, towards the end, you get the sense of a home is a community. And the community is the people in that place is what defines it. Those people can go other places, and that can still be the home. You don't have to hold on to a physical house and like obsess over, oh no, this is my home. Well, if the community changes around you and you still live in that house, weird analogy, but like the guy from Up, the old man who the entire neighborhood's now these giant skyscrapers, he's stuck in this little house. He's not part of a community. That's not really a home for him. He's just living in a place. There's even a confrontation that the 2 friends get into at the end. He's like, stop obsessing over this house. This is not a home. This is not yours, but that doesn't mean anything, a physical thing. I think, and I agree with that. Like a place is a community. And yes, communities can build cities, and communities can be major forces in some period of time and then kind of fade away as other communities come in. That's just naturally the part of an evolving city that San Francisco surely is. Different immigrant communities come and go, different major, forces in the population kind of come and go. But that's every city is like that. And trying to hold on to, oh, well, back in the day, these people were here, but the people are gone, but we're still, these last remaining folks are still trying to hold on to that. It's like, that's, what is that costing you? And is it even worth at that point trying to push back against that change? The community is still there, just might not be physically located in the same place.
Totally.
Which, is definitely something I think, we mentioned, or at least in the Milk review, I was talking about San Francisco being like a forerunner and at the edge of a lot of like positive things. And I think also it can be viewed sometimes as the forerunner of a lot of negative things. I think the homelessness problem that you discussed is really across the entire country now. And maybe it started in San Francisco, California, Los Angeles, and we're kind of a peek into the future where the rest of the country is going to be in 10 years. I think these are going to be issues that are be grappled with on every major city in the United States. It just happened to start, in San Francisco and LA first. And the other line that I just really resonated with me with a lot was when the main character is on a bus and the two girls sort of part of the gentrifiers, I guess, and they're like, oh, this place sucks, I don't like it, blah blah blah, and he says like, do you love it here? And they're like, I don't know, I live here. And they're like, well, he says you don't get to hate it unless you love it. And I think that is definitely true. And a lot of like, if you don't love a place, then you're not really a part of that community. And then at that point, like, what are you really hating on? Something that you don't love is not, you don't get that right. And I definitely believe in that. I think that statement was really powerful that he made. And that's his journey in this entire film. Like, he does hate the city in a lot of ways, but he loves it too. And I think he loves it. And I think that is where you can hate something that you love a lot. And I think that was really powerful. Also with all the way that the movie kind of portrays the main character as someone who's not at home in his own city. There's constantly like a tour bus is going by and the new San Francisco population viewing them as like some sort of museum piece or not part of the city anymore. Oh, you guys were, just this old, like the previous community, but we're now the people that own the place. And just the way the film was able to capture that feeling of like, you're in a fishbowl as the former, you're a current resident, but you sort of feel like a former resident. I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It does feel like it's not perfect. Definitely feels like a first-time director's outing. I didn't think the acting was super great across the board, but
yeah, there's some people who are
just like, I don't know.
The lead character, I think, is a little bit of a hit. Jonathan Majors is the only one.
He's great,
who's great, but a lot of other folks sort of feel like non-actors.
Yeah, I get that exactly. But again, I think the movie, like I said, very powerful, and I thought about it for days, which definitely says something. I think it really, I mean, if I had seen this movie before this podcast, I for sure would have put it in a list on my side if you had it. I think this is a very San Francisco film, top to bottom.
I'm so glad you liked it. And yeah, even that last image, right? That Jonathan Majors and Donald Glover, they are in their home.
Yeah.
And that home may not be a beautiful, ornate home with a witch hat and all of that, but it's still a home. Versus when Jonathan Majors goes to the city to look at the coveted home, and it's all dressed up now and people are viewing it. It's beautiful, but it looks totally soulless.
Exactly.
It looks like a house from the pages of a magazine. It doesn't look like a home at all. Meanwhile, you have Jimmy Fails, he's not literally, in the bay in the boat, but here's somebody who couldn't really come to terms with that central idea that home is where your people are. And he's now in choppy waters, and he'll have to go through that journey to figure out what does home actually mean.
Exactly.
Hopefully he comes back. Or maybe not. Maybe he goes somewhere else. So I kind of love that melancholy note too, that is not tied in a neat bow. That suddenly, Jimmy Fails has overcome all of this kind of love-hate thing that he's been living with. He has to go and deal with that. And I think that's what the movie ends on.
No, I totally agree. It's a great film. I recommend people definitely check it out.
All right. So with that, what's your number 2, Alex?
So my number 2 is Dirty Harry from 1971. This is a film directed by Don Siegel, starring Clint Eastwood, Andrew Robinson. The plot summary is when a madman calling himself the Scorpio Killer menaces the city, tough as nails San Francisco police inspector Dirty Harry Callahan is assigned to track down and ferret out the crazed psychopath. So this film is on the list for me for a lot of different reasons. I think a couple aesthetic things. The film is just a great snapshot of San Francisco in the 70s, from the opening shot of the killer actually assassinating someone in a pool. You see these just beautiful pictures or shots of downtown. Dirty Harry chases the killer all around the city. There's a lot of great car shots running down the street. So you see the city and I think in ways that few other films kind of portray San Francisco. And another interesting note on San Francisco too, I do feel like the city is kind of trapped in the 70s in a way. Like the city looks a lot similar than it did like 30 years. Not that I was alive in the 70s or there in the 70s, but every time I go, I just feel like the city has looks very similar to there's not a lot of, buildings torn down, new buildings put up. The neighborhoods still feel and look a lot as they do even in Dirty Harry. Yeah, there's been, some changes around Embarcadero and things, but unlike some other cities that have done a lot of major sort of facelifts, from New York to LA to Boston, Chicago over the years. For some reason, San Francisco to me has always felt like going back in time a little bit to the 70s. So I think that this film captures SF in the 70s, and that's where I still feel like that a lot. For some reason, too, I associate the crime genre to San Francisco. There's so many great classic crime films, detective films that take place in the city. And I think I just had to then put one of those films on the list here. But in terms of themes, I think for me, San Francisco, embodied by like Dirty Harry's character in this film, is definitely a city that does its own thing. And I think, Milk kind of demonstrated that a little bit too. Like they, people in that city sort of felt they wanted to push for things that other people in the country weren't ready for. There is still this aesthetic or feeling to me of this like Wild West nature of San Francisco, for better and for worse. I mean, I think that's where you get a lot of people that want to go there to, innovate and start businesses. Yeah, that's also in the Valley too, a little bit south, but even in San Francisco, especially now, you see a lot of that because there's still like, this idea of you can do your own thing more so than in other places. I just get that sense from San Francisco, again, for better or for worse. And I think Harry Callahan very much is like a sheriff in an old West town with few rules. Like he doesn't follow his rules at all. He's always pushing back against his inspector. I mean, this movie basically, I think, set the template for the renegade cop, which is a whole genre of crime films that really originated with Harry and Clint Eastwood's portrayal in this film. And I think that sort of do your own thing, don't follow the rules because you kind of know what's best, which is a little bit of like a libertarian, I guess, bent. I do feel it in the city. And I think, again, Milk is one of those people who kind of did that. But, I think there's also some negatives of it, which definitely I think this film portrays that as well, with Harry bending the rules all over the place, even breaking some rules too, to hunt this killer down. And another thing I think this film is very interesting and something that actually I was struggling with when coming up with this list of films, San Francisco, like I mentioned at the outset, to me, San Francisco is so much represented by the 60s, Summer of Love, hippie culture, all these, I think, positive ideals that the hippies had back in 67, 68, 69. And there really are no films I could think of where that culture is A, really represented, and then B, if it is represented, it's always represented as a negative thing. Like there's nothing that really celebrates this. Again, part of the San Francisco's history that I've always really appreciated and thought was very special about the city. And this film deals with that in a very like matter-of-fact way. The villain in this film is essentially a hippie. Like he has long hair. He's got the peace symbol on his belt. And he's a psychopath. He's someone who Harry has to put down in the same way that I think the culture in America sort of were viewing the 60s version of San Francisco as this negative thing that needed to be snuffed out. And, not to get too much into the political side of things, but, that definitely like 70s, 80s, ever since then, I think that we've culturally looked back on those moments as either something silly, like, oh, that was fun, we did that, but we were young and naive, or, oh, we did that and we have to actually stop that. That was a bad thing. We have to punish it. And what this movie does is definitely says, no, like, we're punishing this 60s version of San Francisco because it went too far. And now, like, Harry is the hero and representing what I think there was reactionary pushback to a lot of the things that went on in the 60s that, again, I happen to always respected. And I was struggling to, like, okay, what is the film then that represents the hippie culture in San Francisco at the Haight-Ashbury heyday? And there really wasn't any. And this was one that showed that, but in a way where the film presented as a negative light, which, again, I think a lot of people, or culturally at least, that's how we view this as. And so I'm not condoning it. Like, I think this actually is an interesting point that I always bring up to people too when I'm discussing films, is that a film can have a politics that you don't agree with, but if the film is great, you can still love the film. I mean, this is one of my favorite films. I love the franchise. I love Carrie Callahan is one of my favorite on-screen characters in any movie. But no, would I vote for him for president? Do I agree with the political message of the film? No, I don't. But that doesn't stop me from liking the film. There's plenty of films that I'm like, oh, I love the message of this movie, but it sucks. I don't like the film. So I think this is just a reminder of that too out there, that you could definitely can grow to like films. And look, I think too, beyond that, there's the unsettling nature of the ending, much actually like we were just talking about with Last Black Man in San Francisco. That ending is ambiguous. You don't really know what that character is going to be doing now. Does he find his home? And in this film, yes, Harry gets the bad guy in his own way and actually kills him, but he throws his police badge into the river at the end because he hates the system that he works for too. They're both his enemy, and you don't really know at the end of the film, like, yeah, he won, but did he really win? He seems miserable. He's not happy that he finally got this killer. And that feeling of unsettledness and ambiguity is something I associate with that city. Like, it's still always trying to figure itself out. Now, I don't see this in a negative way, but it's not like an easy city to immediately like Gronk and get, oh, I get San Francisco, I can get it. No, there's consistent layers you peel back, and there's more things, even in the short time that I lived there in 3 months. I mean, I was open to a lot of parts of the city and feelings and vibes that I was not expecting. And I think that the ending of this film, much like the last film that you put on your list, I think really touched on that ambiguity. And look, beyond that, I like I said, I do really just love this film. I mean, Clint Eastwood is one of my favorite actors of all time, and this just on-screen persona here. I mean, you can't get anything cooler than the swagger of him coming out of that diner, still eating the hot dog. There's a robbery happening. He calls it in, but he's like, you know what? I gotta go deal with this. And he just, the way he pulls out his gun and just walks down the street before having his famous, like, do you feel lucky? Well, do you line? Is just the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, I just am in awe of just how cool this guy is and how well, like, Don Siegel captured this character on screen. So yeah, again, it's, I think a lot of the complications of the vibes that San Francisco gives off, I think this film does a good job of capturing, especially when it comes to that reaction against, the hippie culture from the late 60s. Love the film and the whole franchise. Honestly, every film I think in the franchise is great.
Yeah, I had never seen this movie, always had wanted to. So I was glad that you put it on the list. Yeah, he is, what an interesting character.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no question about that.
Yeah.
I think watching this movie now for the first time, especially in light of what's happened with, George Floyd and all the police stuff and such, is a very interesting layer to it. And I was, getting quite unsettled and flustered with all the stuff that he was doing. But I was happy to see that this movie was a little, 2 steps ahead of that, a little bit, at least, at least there's some consequences. Like, he is held accountable to a degree, even though the movie does, reckon him as a hero.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's
it totally does.
2 ways about that. There's something, I found the score to be very a great score that I would listen to on its own. But in the movie, the score is almost sort of like, it's like a fun thriller kind of score, which is quite exciting while horrible things are happening, which was quite kind of disorienting for me. Yeah. But maybe that is the point, as I thought more about the movie, and also, a bit of a time capsule thing too, because he is the hero. So when he's, out and about doing his stuff, like, the score is really sort of kicking in and all of it, which I know if this movie was made now, this movie would have a totally different tone to it. It would not
Yeah.
be a thriller where he's the good guy. That said, though, kind of what you were saying, the ambiguous ending part, and I know this thread has been sort of worked on quite a bit in movies, subsequent movies, which is that the hero and the bad guy are actually mirror images of each other.
Mm-hmm.
You see that a lot in movies, right up to, this year's Batman movie,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
so I think this movie doesn't really get into that specifically, but as an audience member, you do see that they, how different are they actually in many ways. And I don't know, the movie is aware, I don't think the movie is aware of that. The movie really thinks that the hero is the hero.
Yeah. No, I think that they're both characters are breaking the rules to enact an agenda. And I think the
Yeah,
movie's saying that's okay to break the rules to enact an agenda. We just disagree with this other agenda. We like
right,
our agenda.
exactly, we
That is
like
what the
our
movie.
agenda.
Yeah, we like our agenda, but it's fine to break the rules on that.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, I agree. I don't think the movie is really aware of that, but it's more about rule breaking and saying it's okay to break the rules as long as the agenda is something we want,
yeah, I totally agree. I will say though, like, yeah, you see a lot of San Francisco, the shots are amazing and such. I struggle to see how this movie would be, like, how does San Francisco make this movie, or the story? Like, this
Yeah.
movie and the story would be exactly what it is, no matter where it was portrayed.
Yeah, see, that's something I should have mentioned at the outset too. Like when I look at my list, I am thinking very much about needing to take place in San Francisco. And when originally the movie was, I can't remember if it was the book, if it was based on a book, I don't really recall. But the original intent was the film take place in New York. And I don't think, again, with this vibe that I get, especially in California, but even more so in San Francisco, about the renegade cop who breaks the rules and it's a positive thing. I just feel like that in New York would have turned out to be like Serpico, right? As a cop film in New York,
Right.
about the cops breaking the rules of the bad guys, and Serpico's the do-gooder who's trying to bring them down. Something about the setting in making this in San Francisco, and then you couple that with the hippie villain
Thing,
that would not have worked in the same way if it was in any other place, because it is trying to comment on, we're literally like killing the hippie movement in the place that it was highly associated with it. So I actually think that those thematic and then also aesthetic reasons, where you really couldn't do, Harry wouldn't take place in anywhere other than, they actually never brought him anywhere else. I mean, in one of the movies he goes to Carmel, like south of SF. But it's not like, oh, now Harry's in LA and what is he doing now? Like kind of they did with Die Hard, they moved John McClane around to different places. I think Harry, you just need to put in SF, but that's at least my take on it.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that the hippie part, especially, and maybe to a degree the renegade part as well. I just think that a renegade person in the city here would probably stand for something else.
Yeah,
Given,
no, fair.
And not what Harry stands for.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's the part that is a little bit of a dissonance there. But regardless, a very good, very nicely made film, quite brutal actually. I was not expecting this movie to be as sort of hard hitting in its gruesome nature and all of that. So, and again, the score, so during those moments, kind of, I was like, what is this? What is happening?
Yeah.
My head is spinning a little bit. Like, I thought this movie is supposed to be frothy and fun and thrillery, but really horrible things are happening. So I don't know how I'm supposed to feel here.
Yeah, that is interesting. The sequel actually gets even more into it's even more gruesome in that respect in terms of the violence they portray. But yeah, I think it is interesting of like that dichotomy of horrible violence, but the movie's treating it as something where the audience isn't going to be horrified that, because they're almost like egging it on, because that's what I think. It's like this bloodlust that the movie is assuming the audience is after. They want to see these people go down, and they know that horrible things are happening everywhere. It's the 70s. It's everyone is bad, but we want our bad person to fight against this bad person. And but yeah, it is very it's very hard hitting for sure, and pretty on its nose about the horrible, like threatening the kids and all the assassinations, and just the violence is not played for anything but straight gritty violence, while at the same time you got this very action sort of score.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Like it's egging you on, which
Hmm.
is why, I mean, I do take issue with that, but at the
Fair,
same
totally.
time,
Yeah.
you cannot not help and admire this character and the filmmaking and the story, whether you agree with it or not. So I
Hmm.
was very happy to watch it,
Cool.
regardless. Yeah.
Yeah, no, glad you saw it. Actually, in fact, maybe I could have mentioned this too. Like when I moved to San Francisco, in for that internship for 3 months, that was actually the first time I sat down and just watched all the Dirty Harry movies. Like when I was
Mm,
there, and it was really like, oh wow, like this, captures my moment. So
mm,
I actually didn't come to these films till quite later in life myself, but I
mm,
definitely just now they're like one of my favorite films of all time, like the
mm,
franchise. So
mm,
definitely check it
mm.
out, folks haven't seen them. Okay, so let's move on to your number two.
Okay, so my number two is little known film Vertigo from 1958, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, starring Jimmy Stewart, Kim Novak, Barbara Bel Geddes. Quick log line from IMDb: former San Francisco police detective juggles wrestling with his personal demons and becoming obsessed with the hauntingly beautiful woman he has been hired to trail, who may be deeply disturbed. I mean, what can I say more about Vertigo that has not already been said? It's
Mm.
literally the best ranked movie of the last 100 years, blah blah blah, on so many critics lists and such. But for me personally, this movie is on my list because I think we've been dancing around this a little bit, and I was holding myself to not use that word up till now, which is San Francisco is a very mysterious city.
Yes.
I think this captures the mystery of the city. And some of that has to do with, just its topographical elements, the fog, the narrow streets, the steep elevations that sort of come out of nowhere. A city that's very small, but at the same time feels kind of hard to navigate, even if
Mm-hmm.
if you were driving. It's actually easier to navigate on foot if you
Mm.
have strong
I
legs.
was gonna say, yeah, if you
But
want to hike up a
yeah,
hill.
so it's actually not in most cases.
Yeah.
So I think this movie really captures that mystery, and I think you see that in the city, but you see that in these characters as well, specifically Jimmy Stewart's character, who kind of is getting caught up in the web of Madeline, the girl, but also the city. There's like a literal sort of falling in the vertigo that is happening in front of your eyes. And then by the end of the movie, you as an audience member have also been hypnotized in the mystery and the web and the vertigo
Oh
of it
yeah.
all,
Mm-hmm.
which is why this movie is just so, I feel like this movie cannot be pinned down because of
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why this movie, I know you and I actually watched it in 70 millimeters in
Yeah. Oh
Seattle, and we were
yeah.
like, oh, this movie is great. But I had not seen it before that time. So I
Mm.
struggled that, oh, why is this movie, ranked the way it's ranked? And I think after many, many more viewings, I get it because of that nature, that it's an elusive thing which intentionally or unintentionally has been captured on celluloid somehow, and it's a gift that'll just keep giving. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's to me is how I view San Francisco as well, through all the things that we've been talking about. Its dichotomies, the changing nature of the city, how European the city feels, but yet it's in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Most people living here are not from here. There's so many different things clashing, the art and big business. Even the guy, Madeline's husband, who hires Jimmy Stewart, says that, oh, I miss San Francisco from
I know.
from way back when.
Yeah.
So I always laugh at that because this theme of kind of reminiscing on the past of San Francisco has been going on for centuries, probably, it
Yeah.
seems.
No, that was very
And
funny.
right, and maybe that's true for all cities, but I think there's something specific about San Francisco in that
Yeah.
sense, because it's just so mysterious and very seductive too. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
very seductive city because it can charm the hell out of you because it feels very European. It feels, with the beautiful Victorian homes and all these, the way it presents itself, but then it'll catch you by surprise on like a dark, foggy day where it feels kind of melancholy. It feels very lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the way the light is captured in the movie, in single scenes, you see the light going from very bright to super, super dull. And that's not an error.
Right.
It is intentional, and it is how the city is. You can never prepare for what to wear in the city if you're visiting from
Definitely.
outside,
Yep.
because you just don't know what the day has in store for you. So, I'll leave it at that. I don't need to get into the mastery of Hitchcock and everything else, but this movie, whenever I think of San Francisco, and whenever I think of sort of driving around and having kind of a day for myself, this is the movie I think of. This is the score I put on in my car, or if I'm walking around in that sort of mysterious melancholy mode. I think movie is just perfect in capturing that.
Yeah, no, for sure. In terms of the mystery, I also associate that word a lot with San Francisco too. It's a mystery, it's an enigma, it's a paradox, all those things. And this movie is all those things too.
Yeah. Very meta.
It's literally a mystery in the film.
Yeah.
But the film itself is also, even after they, reveal the plot twist with still like 30, 40 minutes left to go, the movie is still like, okay, what is the movie about? Like, you're still trying to unpack it. And, like you had referenced, we saw this movie in 70 millimeter together. And I'm a huge Hitchcock fan. He's definitely one of my top, like, 2-3 favorite directors of all time. Seen all of his films multiple times, and this was the one film over the decades that I just never got. It was like I would watch it and be like, I still don't get it. Like, why do people like this so much? Like, it just was an unapproachable thing, like a white whale to me in terms of my my film knowledge. But then once we finally saw that in that 70 millimeter, then it kind of clicked and I kind of got it. And I think too, San Francisco is a city that is, the more every time I go, it feels there's different things, like I said, that layers to it, and I feel differently about it. And it's always going to be changing, I think. I mean, I've kind of accepted the fact that I'm never going to really have like, okay, well, this is SF. I get it. No. Done. It's going to stay the same now. Every time I go back, it'll be the same. I'll feel the same about it. No, it changes much like this
and
film does.
Part of the mystery of the city. It's
exactly
what makes it mysterious. That 100%. Sort of constant change. Yeah.
Yep. No, totally. And I think you're right about the aesthetics of this film. I mean, what a gorgeous, like, even if you were just to turn the sound off and just look at this film, one of the mostly beautifully shot films. And I think a lot of that has to do, though, with San Francisco itself. Like the architecture, the way the Golden Gate Bridge is, that art gallery that they go to that's by the Presidio. It's just like, it's so gorgeous. The streets as he's driving through, there's so many shots in this film of POV shots of driving through the streets of San Francisco.
My favorite thing.
And it's just so beautiful. And also, again, I feel like looks very similar to other than the fashion styles and the cars, you could drive through those streets and it's the same as it is now. So it's like, oh yeah, no, that does capture what it feels like for me. But yeah, I mean, the redwoods, when they go to the redwood forest, oh my God, just, and all these, it's the physical beauty of the city is captured in this movie more so than any other film that is so far taken place in San Francisco. I mean, it's
natural and man-made.
Exactly. Totally. Both.
And it shows the diversity of the city as well. Like, you're in the Mission, it feels totally different. But then when you're at the Legion of Honor Museum and Presidio, that part feels totally different. And that's, I feel that on a regular daily basis, that it's a small city, but literally between a couple of streets and blocks, the entire mood of the place changes.
Oh, totally.
As you walk around and drive around, which is just so mind-boggling and mysterious, but also super fun.
No, yeah. I mean, it's, again, to compare cities, I guess, you're in New York City, you go to Central Park, you're in New York City. That fact never really leaves you. You just know you're in a park in the city. You go to the Presidio and it's like, where am I? Like, I'm nowhere near where I just was. You do feel like you're entering in this whole other world. And it's something that's very unique to San Francisco, I find. And that's part of why the city is so great. And I enjoy it so much is because of that. And I do think that is very unique to the city. And this film just captures that. I mean, again, when they go to the redwoods, it's like are they on another planet? Like, how did they even get here in a car? Like, how is this even possible? But that's San Francisco. I love this film. And again, I can't, it's been analyzed to death. It's like you said, the number one film of all time on BFI's ranking, at least currently. If anyone has not seen this film, or honestly, if you've seen it, but hadn't really got it, keep giving it a try. It took me decades to appreciate it. And once it opens up to you, you'll love it. I think, honestly, not to make a pitch for San Francisco too, but I think you'll just keep trying it. If it's something that doesn't rub you the right way, go again, you'll find something to love in it at some point. It's just a mystery. It's a mystery. It's mysterious.
Mystery. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And also, last thing I would say is performances. Those two, literally everybody, but there's a time when I sort of felt Kim Novak, maybe this is not a good performance. Maybe it's a little bit too artificial. But then the more I watched the movie, I sort of realized like that is the point.
100%.
Like it's such an artifice. It's almost like an unreal alien, really, who's like driving around, doing whatever she's doing. And of course, as the movie reveals, and I won't give it away,
right,
like layers and meta-ness to that too, that what is put on versus what's actually real, and how is all this landing on Jimmy Stewart, because a lot of the movie is from his lens, and how much does he know himself versus how much of this is just a mystery to him. Even that's unclear. You can keep playing with that. Yeah, I think we should move on to the next movie, because we can keep,
we can have a whole Vertigo episode for sure. There's
totally we are entering a Vertigo ourselves. That's what happens.
Exactly.
All right, what's your number one?
Yeah, so my number one, to continue the theme of a mystery, is Zodiac from 2007. This is a film directed by David Fincher, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Robert Downey Jr., Mark Ruffalo, Chloe Sevigny, and actually a bunch of other people. It's a pretty stacked cast. The summary of the plot: between 1968 and 1983, a San Francisco cartoonist becomes an amateur detective obsessed with tracking down the Zodiac killer, an unidentified individual who terrorizes Northern California with a killing spree. So I think a lot of the themes we just discussed in Vertigo about mystery, unease, paradoxes are the reason why, to me, like, those things do all represent San Francisco. And to me, this film sums all that up very, very well, especially in the sense that this is a real life case. The Zodiac killer is real. Actually, the previous film I discussed, Dirty Harry, is a portrayal of this. I mean, the Scorpio killer is based on the Zodiac killer. Scorpio is fictional, and at the time, the killer was still, in the middle of their killing sprees, Zodiac, and they made Dirty Harry about it. So there's actually kind of a connection between these two films in a way. But this is a real life serial killer that is a case that has never been solved. And this movie, what I think does so brilliantly is capture the fact that a lot of times in life, you can obsess over something about trying to find the answer, and there is no answer to it. You'll never find the answer. And that's, and how do you wrestle with that? How far do you take your obsession? How far do you take your curiosity to trying to solve something that honestly is unsolvable, as is really like most of life is, all the unanswered questions of life. I think kind of the point is you're never going to answer them. And picking a killer and a case that took place over decades. So it's beautiful, all the passage of time montages. Fincher does a lot of great things. It's a great sequence where you see the Transamerica building being made to show passage of time. Another brilliant scene of just the screen is totally black, and there's just songs, and it's like someone turning a radio dial, and the songs are just changing through time, like the hits through the years to show passage of time. This movie takes place over a grand period of time with a real case that does never get solved. To this day, we don't still know who the killer is. And it shows the lengths that this obsession goes with impacting the lives of these characters who become so wrapped up in finding these answers. And for me, I think San Francisco, like I was saying in the earlier statement with Vertigo, is a city that I continue to travel to, continue to enjoy, and continue to try to unpack and try to solve. And I think at some point I just have to realize, like, yeah, the city is it changes so often, and there really is no one version of San Francisco, and that's part of what makes the city so special. Instead of trying to feel like I can nail it down, which is something that I try each time I go, or even coming up with this list, I'm like, okay, what do I feel about San Francisco, and how can I nail that down in film? And you really can't, because the city, you can't nail it down, I don't think. Much in the same way that these characters they're real life people, but these portrayals of them just become so obsessed with trying to find an answer that you can't answer. And I can't answer why San Francisco, I do love it, and why it's such an interesting city and so unique. I mean, you just can't say. And I think going there and experiencing it, that's what you realize, that it is an unanswered question, which is what I think this film does so well. Not to mention, again, like I said with Dirty Harry, I have this vision or impression of San Francisco being sort of trapped in amber in the 70s in terms of how it looks. And this film is majority set in the 70s. And even when it goes through the 80s and then into the early 90s, this fashions change a little bit, but like the city still looks the same. Yeah, they build the Transamerica building, so it's not entirely accurate, but the city still looks the same. And I think that is something that is so unique about the place as well. Like the look of it really hasn't changed, even though so much else about the city has. So and you know, I think the film is totally brilliant, like one of the best films released of this century, easily. My favorite film by David Fincher is one of my favorite directors. I was blown away by this film when I first saw it, and each time I see it, I just am struck by the mastery of every aspect of this film. And it's fantastic. But yeah, this to me really sums up the look, the mood, the feeling I get from San Francisco, and this admission that I have to just be like, look, it'll always be an enigma, but I think that what makes the city so special and so unique that I can't nail it down, and I'll never be able to, but hey, that's why I love it.
If it were up to you, Alex, it sounds like San Francisco for you is a city where people get killed.
Yes, no, every single one of my movies deal with murder and crime.
Assassinations and people getting shot,
I don't know.
Brutally.
I know.
Doesn't sound like a fun place at all.
I know. It's funny. After I put the list together, I looked at, oh, wait a second. These are all like crime, movies based on real crimes, actually. And you can even say Dirty Harry's based on real crime. But so, yeah, maybe that's trying to say something that I don't know, that I didn't realize subconsciously. I just associate the city with crime. I don't know, but that's
fascinating.
It is fascinating. Yeah, it is.
I don't know what this says about the city / you, my friend. But yeah, I agree with everything you said. I haven't watched this movie only a couple of times because it's a long movie, but every time I watch it, it's an experience in itself. It's just brilliant in every department because that's just how Fincher is. Whenever I watch this movie, though, I always think of, because I know how many takes Fincher takes, I'm always doing the math in my head that this movie is so long. And if each scene is like 80 takes at least, how long did it take? And what a brutal exercise this must have been to shoot this movie.
Yeah.
So I have to actively suppress that thought. And in fact, it took me a while to come around to Fincher and really appreciate it. And it's because of this movie, because I would just get so caught up in that this is like the antithesis of what movie making should be in my mind, that you sort of beat something down so to that degree that somehow it just becomes, I'm sure in his mind, like natural. But
right.
To me, that sort of feels like the antithesis to spontaneity, the kind of stuff that I respond to in film, with preparation, of course. Like, look at all of my people, right? Like Linklater, Woody Allen, all these people are all about sort of spontaneity that has been put on screen with a lot of homework and preparedness. So, but over time, as I've watched more and more of Fincher's movies, I've come around to that, and I've come around to how excited actors feel. It's not for everybody, for sure. Right. But there's a certain kind of actor who loves that and, takes on that challenge head on. So it's also interesting to watch this movie. I hadn't seen it in a while, but Robert Downey Jr. essentially is Iron Man in this movie. It's the same. It's like, one step before that is arrogant, cocky guy who's a bit of an outsider in this whole thing, doing his own thing, marching to his own drum beat. And I was like, oh, this probably was your trial run right before the Iron Man movies happened. So that was sort of funny.
Yeah, and succumbing to alcohol at the end of the film too, much like famously Iron Man does in the comics. He's an alcoholic and struggles with that, and Downey Jr. did here too. Like his obsession drove him to just alcoholism and drug addiction.
Yeah. So, but yeah, what a brilliant movie. It's such a mood piece. You can just pick sections of the movie and just watch it and just kind of wallow in it. And yeah, you're right. Like, I think there's something about the mysterious quality of San Francisco, which obviously lends itself to the actual murders. Like, I feel like this whole case would be quite different if it were in, I don't know, New York City or in a small town in Iowa or what have you. There's something about the city, and that once again is captured in the movie as well. I wish there was a shorter version of this movie, which like I keep thinking about this, that if there was an effortless, less rehearsed and less beaten down version of the same story done by Fincher or maybe somebody else, what would that feel like? Because you see the work put in this movie, which I admire and appreciate a lot. But at the same time, it's unfair to compare this with Vertigo. Vertigo feels just so effortless, even though you know a lot of work has gone into it. Everything is intentional. The green dress is intentional.
Oh, yeah.
The trench coat is intentional. The gray pant, jacket, and skirt, all of it is intentional, but it just feels so effortless to me. This doesn't feel effortless. It's work that's on the screen. It's work for the audience as well. I'm happy to do it, but I always think about that.
Yeah, interesting. It's just that you mentioned Hitchcock there too, who was famously like incredibly hard on his actors as well, and which I think is a theme of Vertigo. Actually, that I see that film as a version of Hitchcock, like Stewart's playing Hitchcock and how he deals with actors with telling deals with Novak. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think that Fincher has inherited like that Kubrickian filmmaking process of 1,000 takes, like trying to get to perfection by wearing actors down. But yeah, some actors enjoy it. It's funny you mentioned trying to find a shorter version, because I was going to say, like, I saw the movie in theaters, but the director's cut that is even longer is the one that I think is just such a much better film, and the one that I go back to. I think it's like 15 or 20 minutes longer than the theatrical version. So I even prefer an even longer version versus a shorter one. But
yeah, and it's not about the length, actually. I think it's more about
it's just funny you said that.
The effortless nature of it. I think you see the work, and I appreciate the audacity of the director to say, I demand this work from you, audience members, as well, to come and meet me where I'm at. So I'm very happy to put in the work, but it's just a curious thought exercise.
No, yeah.
If there was a sort of a more spontaneous, effortless version of this movie, would it somehow capture something else? Would it capture this undefinable mystery of the city in a different way? Versus here, that's not what the movie is going after. It is going after the obsession of these people.
Right. And how that ruins their lives in a way. You can argue, but yeah. Okay, Karan, why don't we move on to your number one? Maybe you can move us away from all the murder, mystery, and death. What do we got? What are we ending on?
I might have the perfect answer, actually. So my number one is Mrs. Doubtfire from 1993, directed by Chris Columbus, starring obviously Robin Williams, Sally Fields, Pierce Brosnan. Quick IMDb logline: after a bitter divorce, an actor disguises himself as a female housekeeper to spend time with his children held in custody by his former wife. So I put this movie as my number one because to me, this movie summarizes in my head all the aspects of San Francisco: the joy, the freedom, the loneliness, the mystery, all of it. And going back to even my childhood, I don't even know what San Francisco was, honestly, because I didn't grow up here. But there's something about their house and the streets and how steep they were suddenly, all of it. It always, I don't know, it just sort of drew me in always. And I always was like, oh, one day, wouldn't it be cool to kind of be in this place? And lo and behold, this is where I ended up. So this movie has like a special place in my heart. Obviously, at the center of it all is Robin Williams. A gigantic performance by him, a truly committed performance by him, which is just so brilliant in every aspect. Like you can pull out sections of this movie, and I feel like I probably know most of the movie by heart because I've seen it so many times, but you can pull out sections from the birthday party with the horse to probably one of the most incredible scenes to me shot in movie history, where he's double dating at the dinner place, at the restaurant. To that, to, him getting ready, or him answering all the calls as different people when Sally Field is looking for a nanny. Like all these segments are in themselves just so brilliant that they could be movies of their own. That's sort of the brilliance of this person. It still breaks my heart watching this movie that he's no longer with us.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's if the fact that we have this Death Poet Society and Good Will Hunting as a gift from him, whenever I miss him and think of him, that's where I go to. So anyway, that's enough on Robin Williams. But overall, I mean, I think this movie it's such a jewel box, and you can meet it as you want it. This can be a fun romp where the gag is, oh, dude dressed as a lady. That's a song in the movie too, by the way.
Yeah.
And you can just be done with that, or you can peel the layers and see the details of the heartbreak and the details of divorce and the impact that has on children and how thoughtfully and beautifully that's handled. The beauty and joy you see between Robin Williams and his gay brother and his partner, so devoted to create this whole thing for him. And once again, only in San Francisco will this happen, right? Like you have these two gay guys in a relationship, and they probably do like makeup and such on drag queens on the side. Like maybe that's what their job is.
Right.
And it's not, underlined over the head. It's just is.
Yep.
Which is, I always sort of that, I don't even know what being gay was at that age when I watched this movie, but something immediately brought a smile on my face when I saw those two and the three of them doing, Make Me a Match, the song.
Oh yeah.
Just so adorable. Yeah. So I don't know. There's not much more to add, but it's just a joyous, deep, fun, funny, and a touching movie, a jewel box. And, only Chris Columbus can do that, I think. There are not many people who can direct a movie like this. Is it a perfect movie? Are there, flaws? Of course there are. Like, that's not the point of this movie.
I would say it's perfect, but keep going.
Okay, good.
I would make that argument that it's a perfect movie.
I was bringing up some defense because I was like, if you hate this movie, I'll be very upset. So I was putting my defense guard up to begin with. But I agree. Yeah. It is perfect.
Say it's perfect movie. Yeah.
The children, Sally Field, Pierce Brosnan, everybody. And we've been talking about change in the dichotomy. Even in this movie, that's captured too. He's the artist. He's the free soul. Right. Sally Field is, corporate, has her life together. And the movie does a great job of not villainizing or vilifying anybody. You see both sides. And that's why this movie is sort of perfect to me, because I think all of the movies we've touched on, they do take one side or the other.
Yep.
This movie kind of meets in the middle. And what you said about Last Black Man in San Francisco underlines that homes could be broken, houses could be big or small, but really home is where your community is at, where your heart is at. And even though these two people don't end up together, there's so much heart there that they're going to be fine. And they have a home, even though they live in different houses. Right. Which is sort of what the movie ends on. So I cry every time in that last final scenes, even though I know it's coming. So that's Mrs. Doubtfire, my number one.
Yeah, I mean, I sorry I jumped in on there. I just had to.
Good.
I wanted you to just admit this is a perfect movie. I think this is a perfect film. I have loved this film ever since I was a kid when I first saw it. I've seen it dozens of times. Rewatching it because I hadn't seen it in a couple years, like straight through. It's so. I mean, echoing what you said about Ron Williams, I think not only is this an incredible performance and maybe his best on film, but it's a performance that nobody else could have played this role. I mean, Robin Williams' whole comedic career and persona was different voices, different characters. And he does that in this movie to serve the story. It's not like, oh, we're going to cast, what project can we create around this comedian's persona, which is typically what happens when you have a movie that is a vehicle for a stand-up comedy star. I mean, Ron Williams was more when this movie was made, he'd already made films and done TV, but they captured what makes Robin Williams perfectly, and it feels so natural. No one else could have played this role. Like you said, the different characters that he does, the conceit of the whole film, he's playing to characters, and that is his whole getup is different characters. I mean, maybe the only other role he's ever done that matches him this well would be Aladdin, the genie in Aladdin. Probably it. Those are the most Ron Williams' performances we'll ever get.
But I think this takes over because it has that, but it also has the depth of Dead Poets Society and some
Yes,
of the
true.
more serious movies. So you get
Yeah.
the full spectrum of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think one of the best scenes in the film is at the end in the court.
Yeah.
He's making that speech about wanting his
Oh.
kids, and it's just incredible. Because it really, I mean, I'm not a parent. So I'm speaking as someone who's not a parent, but I think that scene at the end just captures what it's like to love your children in a way that I don't think any movie has really, at least impacted, as someone who's not a parent, has felt like, wow, that must be what that's like. When he says, you know, I will do anything for my kids. Nothing will stand in the way. I acted like a total fool and did something that was illegal and lied to everyone, but I did it because I just love my kids so much, and you can never take them away from me. And that's so powerful. And he delivers that in such just an incredible, it's just a highlight of the film. And then to not stick on the serious pieces too, you know, again, as someone who parents, you know, I'm not a child of divorce. But this movie, even when I was a child, I was like, wow, this is treating divorce in such a serious way, but realistic way. Like neither side is a villain. You're sympathetic to both like both of these people. You get why they fell in love. You get why it worked. You get why it doesn't work and why it's just not going to work. And it's a movie where the plot of it is not like The Parent Trap, where the kids are trying to get the parents back together, or he's not making up Mrs. Doubtfire to win his wife back.
No,
you know, it's not about that. And I think it's
about love for the kids.
And I think that is what makes this movie one of the best movies about divorce. I think even more so than some movies where that's what the movie's about. I think just the way that it treats that and the motivation of the characters is just so great. But yeah, the movie, I don't want to talk too much just about the serious things about the film. It's so funny. And getting back to the San Francisco piece of it too. I mean, I saw this movie as a kid before I ever went to San Francisco. It looked like a magical place. It does capture some of the magic of the city with the architecture, with that house especially is iconic. It's a house that, you know, you wouldn't really see anywhere else in terms of the style and the hill and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the message of the film, like you touched on, is they are a family at the end, even though it's non-traditional. They're not married, but they're still making it work. And the way they treated his brother, Harvey Fierstein, and his boyfriend, it's just, like these people in a relationship, we're not going to hang a lantern on it. We're not going to make it a comedic bit. It's not like funny that these guys are in a couple. It's like, no, they're just in a couple, and that's just what it is. And they can still do funny things. But it's not because they're gay. It's not because they're in a couple. And I think that again goes back to San Francisco, where, you know, I do think of it as a place where you can be yourself, and all forms of love and families are accepted there. And that's just something that I feel. And I think this movie just brilliantly captures that across the board. And I mean, I would have put this on my list if you already didn't. Just going to say, because this is like the first movie that comes to mind. Movies in San Francisco. It's like, oh, Mrs. Doubtfire. Like, of course. And just so it's so funny. Perfect film. I can't speak more highly.
Insanely rewatchable.
Oh my God. Yeah. So good.
I don't know. I think I watch it every year, probably, if not more than once a year. It's its entirety.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've seen bits and pieces of it over the years. Like I hadn't sat down and watched the whole thing in a row in a couple years. And I was just like, wow, this still is just like, what a classic. Maybe it's a good transition then into the films that did make the list, because I was going to say, like, for me, definitely Mrs. Doubtfire, definitely Vertigo. We you know, you covered those already. The Dirty Harry sequel, The Enforcer, Bullet, another crime movie, and then The Rock and The Game. The Rock we already talked about on another episode, or else I would have put that in here too. And then another Fincher movie. So what about you? Any films?
All dark movies, horrible.
I don't know. I can't explain. I don't know. That just I don't know. That's another.
I have all fun movies. I have Sister Act.
That's in San Francisco.
The church that they shoot in is literally 2 blocks away from where I live.
No way. I love that film. I haven't seen that in decades.
I see that very often too.
I should rewatch that. So funny.
Please do. Blue Jasmine, also a great San Francisco movie, and wrestles with a lot of the themes that we've been talking about. So yeah, those were my top 2.
Cool. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the episode today, learned a lot about the city. If you haven't been to San Francisco, hopefully my darker films didn't scare you off from it. It's a great place. Both of us really love it. Make sure to follow us on all your podcast platform of choice. Also follow our social Instagram. We do some things there, and make sure to tell your friends, anyone you know in San Francisco, send them this episode, and just kind of get their take of what they think. And if you go, just make sure to wear flowers in your hair, as they say in the song. So
Oh, I do love that song.
Great song, one of my favorites.
All right, until next time. See you all soon.